Look, the Israeli-Palestinian conflict is one of those topics that makes you want to curl up in a ball and watch videos of capybaras taking a bath. It's complex, it's emotionally charged, and it's been going on for longer than most TV shows that aren't The Simpsons. But sometimes, an event happens that cuts through the noise and forces everyone to pay attention. That's exactly what occurred on June 9, 2025, when the Israeli Navy intercepted a civilian ship named the Madleen. This wasn't just any boat. It was part of the Freedom Flotilla, carrying humanitarian aid, international activists, and for some reason, Greta Thunberg. Apparently, saving the planet wasn't giving her enough anxiety, so she decided to sail towards one of the most contentious places on Earth. The ship was about 125 miles off the coast of Gaza, firmly in international waters when it was seized. Its cargo? Food, medical supplies and baby formula, items desperately needed in a region the UN has warned is on the brink of famine. The activists, including French MEP Rima Hassan, were detained and carted off to Israel for deportation. The Freedom Flotilla Coalition immediately called it a pirate attack, which, to be fair, is what you call it when armed people board your ship in international waters. Israel, on the other hand, dismissed the whole thing as a public relations stunt and insisted its actions were perfectly legal. And right there, you have the core of this entire messy debate. Two completely opposite interpretations of the same event, both claiming the sacred mantle of international law. This single incident is a microcosm of the much larger, decades-long legal battle over Israel's policies. For years, legal scholars, human rights organizations, and the United Nations have been locked in a fierce debate about whether Israel's actions, particularly its long-standing blockade of the Gaza Strip, violate fundamental principles of international law. The arguments touch on everything from the definition of military occupation to the rights of civilians in a conflict zone. It's a debate that has only intensified since the horrific Hamas attack on October 7, 2023, and Israel's subsequent devastating military campaign in Gaza, which has resulted in a humanitarian catastrophe of staggering proportions. The seizure of the Madleen brings all these abstract legal questions into sharp, uncomfortable focus. Was this a legitimate act to enforce a legal naval blockade, as Israel claims? Or was it an illegal act of aggression that violated freedom of navigation and obstructed life-saving humanitarian aid, as its critics argue? The answer you get depends entirely on who you ask, what legal texts you prioritize, and let's be honest, your underlying political sympathies. This isn't just an academic exercise. The lives and well-being of millions of people hang on the outcome of these arguments, making it crucial to understand the legal battlefield on which this conflict is being fought. So, let's dive into the legal weeds. The primary accusation against Israel and the foundation for many other claims is that it is an occupying power in the Palestinian territories, including Gaza. Now, Israel officially withdrew its troops and settlers from Gaza in 2005. But according to the UN, most international bodies, and a stampede of legal experts, that doesn't end its obligations. They argue that because Israel continues to control Gaza's borders, its airspace and its coastline, it maintains effective control over the territory. Under the Fourth Geneva Convention, an occupying power has a legal duty to ensure the welfare of the occupied population, which includes making sure they have access to food, medicine, and other essential supplies. This brings us to the blockade. Since 2007, after Hamas took control of Gaza, Israel has imposed a strict land, air, and sea blockade on the territory. Critics, including Amnesty International and Human Rights Watch, argue this blockade amounts to collective punishment. It restricts the movement of people and goods, crippling the economy, and trapping over 2 million Palestinians in what has been called the world's largest open-air prison. They argue that punishing an entire civilian population for the actions of its leadership is a textbook violation of international humanitarian law. The blockade is seen not as a targeted security measure, but as a blunt instrument that inflicts immense suffering on ordinary people. The recent seizure of the Madleen is Exhibit A for those who say the blockade is illegal. According to the San Remo Manual, which outlines the laws of naval warfare, a blockade must not bar the passage of humanitarian aid to a civilian population. The International Court of Justice has issued multiple binding orders demanding Israel allow unimpeded humanitarian access to Gaza by stopping a ship loaded with baby formula in international waters. Critics say Israel is not only violating the freedom of the seas, but also actively defying direct orders from the world's highest court. It's like getting a court order to stop blocking your neighbor's driveway and then responding by putting up a bigger fence. Finally, there are the broader human rights concerns. Groups like the Israeli human rights organization B'Tselem and Amnesty International have gone so far as to label Israel's policies toward Palestinians as a system of apartheid. They point to a web of laws and policies that they argue systematically privilege Jewish Israelis while oppressing Palestinians in both Israel and the occupied territories. This includes restrictions on movement, discriminatory land policies, and a two-tiered legal system. These are explosive allegations, and they form the backdrop against which every action, from a military strike to the interception of an aid ship, is judged by a significant portion of the international community. Now, to be fair, Israel doesn't just sit there and silently take these accusations. It has a robust and long-standing set of legal counter-arguments, and the first and foremost is self-defense. Israeli officials will point to the constant threat posed by Hamas and other militant groups in Gaza. They will remind you that the blockade was tightened in 2007 precisely because Hamas, an organization officially designated as a terrorist group by the United States and the European Union, took power. From Israel's perspective, the blockade is not a punishment, but a necessary security measure to prevent weapons, materials for building tunnels, and other military hardware from entering Gaza and being used to attack Israeli civilians. Regarding the occupation status, Israel disputes the claim that it still occupies Gaza. The government's position is that after its 2005 disengagement, it no longer exercises effective control over the territory, and therefore is not bound by the specific obligations of an occupying power under the Geneva Conventions. Instead, Israel frames its relationship with Gaza as one of armed conflict with a hostile entity. In this context, a naval blockade is a legitimate tool of war. A former Israeli legal advisor argued that during an armed conflict, international law allows for the interception of ships suspected of trying to violate a lawful blockade, even in international waters. This legal framework is what Israel uses to justify actions like the seizure of the Madlin. The Israeli Foreign Ministry didn't see a humanitarian mission. It saw a public relations stunt designed to delegitimize its security operations. They argue that aid can and does enter Gaza through established land crossings that are subject to Israeli inspection. Therefore, attempts to breach the naval blockade are not about delivering aid, but about provoking a confrontation and undermining Israel's right to defend itself. They see these flotillas as deliberate attempts to create an international incident, knowing that Israel will be forced to act to maintain the integrity of its blockade. Furthermore, Israel has always maintained that its own judicial system is independent and capable of investigating and prosecuting any alleged violations of law by its forces. It often points to its High Court of Justice as a check on military and government power. When faced with international criticism, Israel's response is frequently that its own domestic legal processes are the appropriate venue for addressing these issues, not international courts that it argues are biased and politicized. This appeal to state sovereignty is a powerful argument, suggesting that Israel, like any other nation, has the right to manage its own security and legal affairs without undue outside interference. So you have two sides with entirely different legal universes. Why doesn't an international referee just step in and make a call? Well, that's because the international legal system is, to put it mildly, a bit of a mess. There's no global police force to arrest a country. Enforcement relies on a patchwork of treaties, courts, and political bodies, all of which have serious limitations. For starters, you have the principle of state sovereignty. You can't just sue a country without its consent. It's like trying to give your cat a pill. If it doesn't want to cooperate, you're going to get scratched. The two main bodies people look to are the International Criminal Court and the International Court of Justice. The International Court of Justice deals with disputes between states, and while its 2024 orders for Israel to allow aid into Gaza are legally binding, the court has no way to enforce them. It's like a judge ruling that you have to pay a fine, but having no bailiffs to collect it. The International Criminal Court, on the other hand, prosecutes individuals for war crimes. However, Israel is not a member of the Rome Statute that created the court and does not recognize its jurisdiction. So when the ICC prosecutor seeks arrest warrants for Israeli leaders, Israel simply says, "No, thank you," and there's very little the court can do about it. This is where politics, and specifically the UN Security Council, comes in. The Security Council is the one body that can authorize real, tangible consequences like sanctions or even military intervention. The problem? The 5 permanent members, the United States, United Kingdom, France, China, and Russia, have veto power. For decades, the United States has consistently used its veto to shield Israel from resolutions it deems critical or unfair. This political protection from a powerful ally effectively neuters the UN's strongest enforcement mechanism, turning potentially binding resolutions into little more than strongly worded letters. Ultimately, the Israeli-Palestinian conflict exposes the profound weaknesses of our international legal system. It's a system built on the idea that states will voluntarily comply with the rules, which works great until a state decides the rules don't serve its interests. The result is a frustrating cycle of accusations, counter-accusations, and legal debates that rage on while the facts on the ground, the blockade, the humanitarian crisis, the violence, continue unabated. It shows that international law is often more of a suggestion than a command, especially when powerful nations and their allies are involved. And that is a deeply sobering thought.